Divine Rise, blessed be to your day. May be everything you require to create everything that you desire. Welcome to another day to invest into you. Another day to invest into you. I woke up. Actually, I was like in my head. I woke up and I was thinking about something about my mind. Like after Friday, if you're not tuned into Friday's lecture, Friday's class is streamed up now. I got into the aspects of from the highest level based on your fear that what you're trying to receive is pity. Think about that. Remember, we gotta go outside of good and bad. What you're trying to maintain is your level of the pity or the need or the want of the internal. So it's like we're streaming for pity. When we think about our job, when we think about the relationships, when we think about the things that we create based on the traumatic experiences, based on the things that we've not dealt with, a lot of times the thing that we're searching for, and I learned what I was searching for was pity. I was searching for the pity to continuously form my patterns and keep me in that state of that projection through that pity. It made me think about self-sabotage. And self-sabotage, the difference between self-sabotage and destruction. I noticed that earlier on in my work with myself that the point of reaction we've been getting into, comfort simply means reaction. So as long as I was able to react to it, I can maintain my behavior. I can maintain how I feed my behavior, how I set my patterns, and how I stay within certain habits, how I maintain that inside of my space. So it made me really start thinking about sitting in my shadow. Sitting in your shadow long enough, you start to get into the realm of the destruction. You understand that we have to understand that healing is not as we perceived in the light of preserving something. Healing is not about preserving. Healing is not about the protecting the projection or our identity. Healing is a destructive force. Similar to every time, now think about this. Every time you said you loved something, it always gave you a reason to try to push away. The more that you said that you loved something, the more emotion that you put into it, the more it became destructive, the more it became triggering the self-sabotage pattern within yourself. Like, so you wanted to start self-sabotaging. The moment that you got to learn something about yourself, the moment that a lot of times when I got to learn something about myself, the only reason I would sit in it was based on this provisional aspect, this necessity based on this need and want. I felt that if I could still control it, I still had power. But as I've broken down before, power is not found in control, it's found in my authority. So I have to take that ownership. All this week, this is what we're going to be getting into. God Hour Podcast, we're going to be getting into the state of contingency, understanding that there's a difference between you writing off a relationship based on so you can stay within the pattern, and then from the ownership perspective, having that contingency of like, I can write off this lesson. Remember, there's a difference between me being able to sit in a space and based on my avoidance, based on my neglect, based on these internal wounds, based on guilt, based on a lot of these trigger points that I've created for myself, I had to realize that I can write off any relationship. I can write off the job. I can write off friendships all day. write them off all day. But at the end, when it came back up, because you remember everything goes through a cycle, think about it like when you paying your taxes and it comes time to, okay, cool, well, you spent this much money on this, you spent this much money on this, so now you owe us this. The ownership mentality, but I was like, but I got rid of that relationship before the end of the year. I did this before the end of this, before it got too bad. I could do all bad by myself, all of these type of narratives. But I was realizing that I was self-sabotaging myself, because when it came back around the next year, in this context of yourself, the next year of your visual, it was more of the same. Even with me there's a difference between the pity, the projection, and the pattern, or the pity, the pattern, and the projection. There's a difference between me being able to reflect on my job and my relationship and my life and everything that happened, the traumatic events. There's a difference between me reflecting on it and then self-reflecting. Self-reflecting is sitting in the shadow. When we're in a state of reflection, it's simply this pattern of, I want to see where I'm standing at. Am I standing in front of the light, in front of my shadow, or behind my shadow? My shadow, I let my shadow go forward when I got angry, and then I was ruthless, say all types of shit based on a high sense of emotion to try to invoke the neglect, to invoke pain, to invoke something. Or if I was in front of it and I was allowing it to evoke through me, all it was in a way to feed my habit, to feed my pattern, to feed the addiction. And the longer that I stayed in that position, the more I wanted to feed the addiction. The more I wanted to feed the self-sabotage. The more I got stuck in that time loop. Remember, I've talked about it before. Time is nothing but your emotions. That's why whenever you have emotions of love, and it seems long forever because you put it under the aspect of love and your expectancies that you put into that space, as opposed to you're going through an aspect of fear, you can't wait for it to be over because you're not getting you. Now we look at this aspect in the duality aspect. A lot of the things that I was doing where I was getting a lot of stuff in the physical connection was always based in fear. So it was always based in the pity. It was always based on someone taking pity. I even remember when I was having conversations, it was always based on pity. That means I would say something on an emotional tense of, it would always be, I did this and I did that and I do this and I can't believe this. But then I had to really start thinking about it. What was my root to that? See, by me not sitting in my shadow, I didn't know what the root to that was. I didn't accept the root. Even when I acknowledged the root to the way that I would act. Even when I would acknowledge it. Even when we acknowledge the root to how we act or why the way we are. It's still from a point of reaction. It was still from a point of reaction. My mom did this, so this is why I'm like this. Okay. Cool. How long does that work? As long as I'm trying to preserve it. So the only way that I could preserve acting this way or this pattern was my mother still had to be seen that way. I couldn't see my mother. I had to get to a point to see my mother as her name, as who she was, not what I came through in what she was to me. Oh, that's my mom. Oh, that's my pops. Oh, that's my brother. Oh, that's my sister. Oh, that's my best friend since the 3rd grade. Oh, that's this person. Oh, it was easy for me to keep them it was easy for me to keep them in that space so I can stay in a state of reaction. Remember, comfort is reaction. So as long as I could react to whatever my mother was saying, as long as I was reacting to whatever relationship, whatever beloved was saying, whatever, even in those spaces, it was just based on the reaction. So now that I'm sitting in the reaction, I'm not sitting in the shadow, or I'm not being able to sit in that guilt. I wasn't sitting in the insecurity. I wasn't sitting in that abandonment. I wasn't sitting in that sense of separation. I wasn't sitting in it. I wasn't becoming familiar with it. I wasn't becoming familiar with it. I was trying to keep relating to it. So in my space, remember, your space is your opportunity. Naturally, as I'm trying to relate to my trauma, because my trauma is sitting in the shadow, not me. As long as I'm trying to relate to it, then I can find relation in my space. Grand rising, grand rising, grand rising. I can find the relation inside of my space. I can find the provisions in my space to keep me acting in that way. So I can run around and say I didn't have time. I could run around and say I didn't have time. But when I did have time, since I was running around in this space with myself saying I don't have time, everything that I created based on me saying I didn't have time, or everything that I created based on the whatever wound I was in at that point in time, that emotional aspect, that emotional void, that's what would come up first. You create the trigger. You create your triggers. When we think about the aspects of what you create, and you're the original and you're the creator, this level of honesty is what's going to take you to where you need to go. Where it's going to allow the things to come in as they come in based on the ownership. That means from ownership, I can now set my contingencies. That means no matter what it is, good or bad, whatever the result, that's the contingency that needed to be set in place. So as I start learning these contingencies, as we're going to get into on the podcast, as I started learning to stay in a state of contingency, I could better prepare. I could analyze. I could go through the aspect of the procedure. I could see and look at myself based on the self-assessment. See, it does me no good. It does me no good to assess the light, because the light comes from the dark. The dark, therefore, is absolute. My darkness is absolute. So whatever result comes out of my darkness, that's absolute. So to assess that, it kind of just keeps me in a state of acting the same way that I'm acting. But if okay, cool, whenever it comes up, that's absolute. What is this I'm trying to preserve based on this result? If I feel this void, what am I trying to preserve inside of my space? What am I preserving? Am I preserving neglect? Am I preserving, what wound am I preserving? Am I preserving my physical attachment? What provisions am I trying to protect in my space? Because I got used to the survival. Think about it like this. Back in the 80s, I remember back in the 80s, I came back up in the 80s. I remember back in that day, I remember that when it came to the welfare, it was like you had to go stand in line at this one building. You'll stand in line and you get a box of stuff. Get a box of cheese and whatever other provisions that you needed throughout the month. And you can just keep going there and how that worked. I remember standing in that line. A lot of us, when it comes to this space, you're still standing in that line based on a provision. So you do things in a provisional tense. So you're never able to set the tone to be able to write it off. You don't own it. So now think about your life in your space. Think about that pattern. Think about that pity. Think about that pattern, that pity, that PPP that you keep putting out. You keep taking out this loan, and based on your level of energy, you're always going to go in default. Always. If I'm always trying to preserve my light or my identity, or this part of myself that is hurt, what's up? If I'm always trying to preserve that aspect, I got to keep co-signing for it. So now I create things based on that co-signing. I got to create things based on that cosign. So now I got to look at my space in that predestination of my pattern. Remember, I've talked about this before. Before now, if you took me back 5 to 6 years ago, you couldn't tell me half of the things that I do, the strength that I'm in, the way that I speak. It would sound broken. It would sound hurt. I would only say it through an aspect of emotion. I would only say it through whatever emotion was present. I would always sit there in that space with myself all the time. So whenever it came to a point of reflection, I'd be looking at my life And then I start making cuts based on that. So if I was in a relation, whatever relationship, friendship, if it didn't no longer serve a purpose to the provisions of where I was at, I mean, I needed to reset. That means my neglect was being technically sitting in a space of neglect. You always need neglect. You need something to be neglected. Sitting in that space of avoidance, you always need something to avoid. Or you need something to avoid you. Sitting in that rejection, you always need something to make you feel rejected or make you feel like you're a third world citizen. You always need it. That's the addiction. That's what I mean by a lot of the state when you're separated from your shadow, what you're looking for is not what you, not standing by that definition. So the love that I wanted in reality was based on pity. Based on what I could do, the provisions that I could provide, the provisions that I could protect. So it was never based on love, it was based on pity. That's why I can look back at my conversations and I notice when I didn't say things and how I said things, it was always based on pity. Bottom line in that work, it was always based on pity. I could always say something that was a quick one-liner. I had plans for this and plans for that. We could have did this and this, but you just didn't want to. Oh, it was pity. Because I had to remember how I created the space. I created the space based on pity. So the space was always very physical. That means in the earlier ons in the stage, it was very physical. And I'm not just talking about the aspects. Remember, when we talk about sex or the sacred energy exchange, it's anything to keep forming a physical attachment. So even if it wasn't even the physical sex, I still was doing things and I was still using my energy to exchange in physical and material shit. Whether it was, around this time of the year I go on a trip, you come on a trip with me. You can come here with me. We can go do this. So I was still living in the pattern. I was living in the pattern. So since I'm living in the pattern and I got this perception of myself that I'm trying to preserve, everything in my space got to stay the way it is. But how in the land of duality, you created your do's and don'ts. So now you, without saying your do's or you say your don'ts, it really didn't matter. I don't accept this, I don't accept this, and I don't accept this, and I don't accept this. Conditions were great. But so what about if I'm sitting here and my conditions are met? Imagine if your conditions are met inside of the space. Think about it. Your conditions are met. Your conditions are met. You get the meal that you want every day on the table. You get the meal that you want. You get all the sex that you want. You get whatever you're wanting inside of that space. All your conditions are met. Now you got to sit there and assess your standards. Damn, they're doing everything that I always wanted. But I'm sitting there, damn, they're doing everything I always wanted. But now, when it's time to do stuff that they wanted, why couldn't I do it? Because it wasn't part of my standard. My self-worth. Yeah, you're always going to end up in that state of being, exactly, you're always going to end up in that state of being bored. Because your conditions are met. The provisional aspects are met. So if I got my conditions met, that means I don't have to think about the contingencies. What happens if everything is met? Then what? Now I got to sit there? Because remember, you just keep going in that cycle over and over and over again. Living in that desire for that pity. You want people to... So now, I always say this, look at your space and look at your space. Your space is your opportunity. When it comes to you really doing the internal work, how many things in your space are telling you no and how many things are telling you yes? How are you feeling? It don't matter about the no or the yes. It matters how are you feeling behind that no? What is the feeling behind that no? What is the feeling behind that yes? What are you searching for? Is it taking you deeper inside of yourself or is it keeping you outside of yourself? Is it keeping you in that state of reaction? These are the questions that you ask yourself as you sit inside your shadow. Healing is destructive. Healing is destructive. Getting past the point of self-sabotage. Your ego, remember I talked about this on Friday in the lecture, your ego or your humanity aspect or the identity that you create, it keeps you in suspension in between the shadow, the true shadow, and then the death or the transition or outside of that zone. So if I'm staying in this, if I'm staying floating around my shadow and my shadow is still attached to me, that means it creates all the breaking points. But if I'm only concentrating on no one getting into that shadow, no one seeing that aspect of me staying in this position of wherever I'm at based on the provisions, then I never get to see the breaking points and the cracks. I'm always trying to repair the cracks. Every point that comes into your life, are you trying to keep the cracks in order? You're trying to keep the emotional voids filled? Because that's the cracks. Those emotional voids that you keep feeling, those are the cracks. That need or want for something to give you a sense of your identity staying where it's at, the behavior, so you can be happy, you can be whatever it is. That's the emotional void. The emotional void is the point of pity or the cracking point or the breaking point. That's what I mean by you have to sit in that shadow. You have to understand and rediscover those aspects of yourself. You always have the time. You always have the time. Time is the aspect of the emotion. The emotion is the emotion sets my turn, sets the pace. My pace sets how patient I can become. But if my emotional void is fear-based, 9 times out of 10 it's always fear-based, or it's guilt, I'll feel bad for sitting down with myself. I'll feel bad for sitting down and being like, you know what? I'm going to sit down for a couple minutes. I feel bad for sitting to myself. I feel bad for setting my standard. I feel bad for, why do I feel bad for it? Because the more and more you sit in that shadow, anything that's inside of your space, you're going to start seeing more of it. You're going to start seeing it as the reflection of what it really is. That's the key. You're going to see it as a reflection for what it is. Whether it's the person, whether it's the place, whether it's the thing, whatever it can be the new couch that you bought. It can be the new bed that you bought. It can be the new TV that you bought. It can be anything that you purchased under the provisions of your emotional energy. It's not just people. It's anything that's inside of your space and the reason that you sat it there. You got to sit in that shadow. You got to go past the point of self-sabotage. That means you're going past the point of reaction. You got to get into that destructive space. And it's when we get into that Friday, throughout the week, we're going to get into the shadow masculine, the shadow feminine aspects. We're going to get into those aspects even deeper, especially with isolation. Yeah. A lot of times I remember for myself that when I started feeling it, whenever it would come up, I would feel it and then I would immediately go to one of my safe houses. I've talked about those safe houses before. Those safe houses, whether it was the safe house, whether it was a physical place or a physical person or whatever it was, that was my safe house. So I could use that energy. Remember, you're doing it all unconsciously. But if I keep doing it in the physical realm, in the material aspect, then I'm only going to transmute to create down here. I'm creating in the land of destruction. I'm creating it to be destroyed. I'm creating it to be destroyed. I'm creating it so I can just stay being angry, stay being sad, stay being upset. And then when it comes to the end of it, we talked about that Thursday, that quantum reset. When it came time to reset, now I'm looking at my space and the things that were inside of my space. This is where manipulation comes in. Now you sitting in your space And now you're allowing your emotions to run everything for you. Now you're sitting there, all right, I was sorry about this. I apologize for this. Now you're in a state of apology. But if I understand apology means the changing of a behavior, my self-sabotage is going to kick in. I'm going to change the behavior just long enough so I can sustain my behavior till it's forgot about, till it goes back into my shadow. But the longer that I stay in that manipulation state, the longer I got to keep manipulating the shadow. The longer the shadow has power. The longer that I no longer stay present. That guilt has to stay present. So everybody in my space, I got to make feel guilty for me. That neglect got to stay present. So now everybody in my space got to have their own execution based on neglect. It can be something as simple as, I'm going to use a simple ass aspect of it. If you know that you don't eat a certain food, as an example, if I don't eat a certain food and my mom cooks that food and my mom tells me to come over, my guilt complex, or the guilt that I learned from my mother and how she created that food to feed that guilt, where you think I'm about to go? Where you think I'm about to go? I'm going to go feed the guilt over there. I'm always going to be led by the emotion. You're always going to be led by the emotion. My mom made me feel guilt about myself. So what were the foods that I ate based on guilt? How did I eat? How did I suppress my guilt? So I just keep eating those foods. I keep watching that. I keep doing this. All of that to maintain the pattern. All of that. Remember, you eat with your emotions. You do everything down here based on emotion. In the higher aspect, that's your magic and what you attract. But if I'm always stuck beside the emotion and not in the emotion, I can't feel it. Most of us go into this space with ourselves. You're not feeling the emotion because you're not emotionally present. The trigger forces you to become present in the emotion. From there, it's your decision, your choice. Is this an opportunity for me to sit in this shit? Maybe I need to sit in it. Maybe I need this. Maybe I'm at a point where this relationship and how I built it or how I designed it, maybe I need to self-reflect on how I designed it. Now I can learn from the relationship rather than me saying, you know what, it's over, fuck all this. Man, fuck this job. Man, fuck this job because now I'm doing it based on the emotion, and then when everything calms back down, I go back to it. And if I don't go back to that job, I'll go back to a job that's similar. If I don't go back to that relationship, I'll go back to a relationship that's similar. If I don't go back to that friendship, I'm going to go back to a friendship that's similar. I'm going to just keep assimilating the same things. I'm going to just keep assimilating all the same things. I'm going to keep moving the same exact ways that I've been moving and then saying, damn. Don't feel bad about that, Dawson. Like it's because the acknowledgement is the part of that process. After we acknowledge it, like I remember having safe houses. And my safe house used to be, if I got in an argument at the house, and I remember I had the same safe houses. So it took me back, and I'm gonna talk about this in the podcast. No, I talked about this in the lecture. The craziest part about your safe houses is they're the same safe houses or the same conduits of the safe houses that you had when you were little. Same safe houses. So that made me think, I'm not even really here based on I'm projecting myself into this space. I'm still sitting in that room. I'm still sitting in the room at my mom's house, at my parents' house, sitting there waiting for somebody to say I could come out and eat some food. That's basically what I was doing. When you really get to sit in your shadow, you start to realize where you've been sitting at the entire time. And that's the overwhelming feeling. That's when that overwhelm come up. That's when that anxiety come up. And that's what I teach whenever I'm doing counseling. When I'm doing the counseling and therapy session, and I teach you to sit in it. Sometimes I might very well, no matter how you come to me in this example, no matter how you come to me, I am the crossroads. That's the vessel that I serve as. I serve as the crossroads. So at the end of a therapy session, I might leave you in a space where you literally don't even realize it. But I've had some of my clients, they start in a lighted space, and before we're done with the session, they sitting in the dark somewhere. They don't even realize that they did it. They don't even realize that we've moved them into the dark, because you got to go sit in that darkness. There's no more running away from that darkness. In that darkness, everything is absolute based on what you've accepted. So everything that comes out of that space is your absolute. That's your result. I don't care how much you try to dress it up, doll it up. That's your result. I don't care so let's go into the aspects of, if you have maternal wounds going on, you got the maternal wounds, you got fraternal wounds, you got the wounds from your the masculine, all these wounds in there. Everything that you bring out of that space, I don't care how you dress it up, I don't care how dressed up it is, I don't care I don't care if your pops was passive aggressive as hell, so you wanted a more aggressive. All you're doing is dressing up a thug. That thug ass nigga, that nigga's still passive aggressive. Okay. All right, we back. I wanted to bring it back. It's part 2. Y'all will see the edit when I edit it. But yeah, we were getting hot. That's what it was. But we got to understand in this mindset with ourselves in that space that you created the trigger. You created those triggers. You created those points for you to do your work. So everything in your space is an opportunity for you to learn yourself. But if I'm not taking the opportunity to learn myself, that means I'm taking the opportunity naturally to reject myself, naturally to neglect myself. Whatever wound that you live in, remember, I've talked about this before, and staying locked within these aspects of these wounds. Everything that you created inside of your space is to help you learn. So think about it like this. If I stay inside of a certain position with myself and I have certain conditions, then I have certain provisions, then I'm going to use my provisions or the physical shit that I have to create my sets to feed my space. Now, my provisions are only based on the preserved level of light. My provisions are only based on my preserved level of light. So if my provisions are only based on the preserved level of light, that means everything inside of my space, I'm always going to burn myself out. Naturally. See, we've been taught we've been given ourselves to learn behavior to burn ourselves out. You're giving yourself the tools, but now you've been taught the only way that you can activate and be that identity is by burning yourself out. Is by keeping yourself in this high emotional sense with yourself so that you can stay within the pity, to stay within the pattern, to stay within the projection. So now your senses, if I don't see it, if I can't touch it, if I can't feel it, if I can't attach to it, then it's not really, but you're of everything. This is what I mean by it's time to sit in that shadow. It's time to sit in that shadow. It's time to allow yourself to sit down, sit in the shadow, and let's do the work. Do you want to? I know you don't want another year like last year. I know you don't want another month like last month. You know you don't. But the key is going to be that self-reflection, that self-assessment. The key is going to be able to look at those points and really understand with yourself and sit there with yourself. The time is to get past that point of the rejection, the point of reaction. Comfort is reaction. That's all comfort is reaction. It's not, but I want to live a comfortable life. You want to live in a state of reaction. One of the things that I had to learn was, in order for me to live in a state of comfort, I had to live in a state of reaction. That means everything can make me react, therefore I would stay within that comfort zone. That means if my job did something, I react to it. All it was showing me is that my provisions were in question. I had questionable provisions. the license, the ordinances, the contracts that I signed up. Remember, I talked about those 360 deals that you signing. You keep signing them same 360 deals with yourself. Just to say what? That you balling, that you the best that, okay. You create the triggers for everything. In the land of your destruction is your triggers. If you want to stay the way you at, keep staying where you at. Don't listen to this video. Don't tune in. But the reason that you keep coming into this space with yourself is because it's time to find yourself. I said it a long time ago that the old paradigm are the old patterns and the old thoughts based on pity. The debating, the arguing back and forth, all of that serves your purpose in that old aspect of yourself, maintaining an identity. But this new space over here, this is your shadow. You can no longer run from this. It's always behind you. You might as well sit back and sit in it. I love sitting in it because now that I know how to sit in it, now that I've learned how to do the directions with it, now it's a whole different game. Now, instead of me always saying, I want to speak this into the universe, I'm understanding that those are my parallels. It's all about seeing the parallels from sitting in that position. It's all about becoming the observer. It's all about learning to observe. You telling yourself you ain't got no time? Yeah. It's a measure of your progress. If you still using 3 years ago as your, think about it like this. If I'm still using 3 years ago to assess where I'm at now, I'm not here. If I'm looking back at 3 years ago and I'm still using the memories from 3 years ago to assess where I'm at here, I'm proving to myself that I'm not present. Because now from that point, I'm trying to see the future. I can't see the future from the past. I can't see the different parallels in front of where I'm at. It's going to be offset. It's going to be split. It's going to stay in duality. We're gonna get deep into this throughout the week. This week on the God Hour podcast, we're going to get into that state of contingency, understanding the aspects of the soul healing and the shadow, I'm going to give some examples of the integrated shadow and that LLC mentality. And then on Friday, we're going to get into that provisional purpose, or setting the standards of limitation. We're going to get into that on Friday. And throughout the week, we're going to keep getting deeper and deeper into this. This is just the overall or the rough draft of the download that I provide. If you want to get deeper, or you say, you know what, it's time, hit me in the inbox. Go ahead and book that reading, book that consultation. Let's get this shit started. I can't make you ready. Nobody can make you ready. Your insecurity is going to make you ready. Your jealousy is going to make you ready. Your rejection, your guilt, that's what's going to make you ready. But you got to get past that point of comfort. Yeah. I desire you to be the fucking best. I love you. We love us. Ashe.